Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We are here today with Nicole Sheldon, who is a licensed traditional Chinese medicine and herbalist. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking their time this evening to join Dragonfly's Let's Talk Period series. This is our fourth week that we are coming on to this series, and it's about tackling period shaming, the menstrual mysteries that we all may have. And I just wanted to remind everyone, we are a platform for educating, driving change, and we provide you with different people and specialists and different specialists' opinions on this. And we are here today with Nicole, who actually treats me for acupuncture and has been treating me for traditional Chinese medicine as well. So first of all, can we get an introduction from you, Nicole? Like, what do you do? How'd you get into this?
Hi, thank you for having me. And well, my background, I actually initially went in to study, well, not traditional, but biomedical background. Initially, I went to Tufts. And while I was there, I veered off into Chinese medicine because I worked in an acupuncture clinic and I decided to get my doctorate in that after studying initially biomedicine. And when I got my doctorate in Chinese medicine, I did get trained as well in the biomedical model, but what I practice is herbs and acupuncture. And I find it's a lot of great tools because you can treat so many different situations. I don't want to call them all illnesses, but people can come in with a menstrual irregularity, since we're talking about menstruation, or PMS or infertility or any of that, and I can treat all of it without having to be a specialist necessarily, because we treat the whole system, the whole body. So I really love what I do.
So it's a very Eastern approach to medicine. So it's interesting how it seems like a very East meets West approach to healing yourself that you've taken on.
It is, and Chinese medicine has, I mean, it overlaps in some ways with Ayurveda, and if you look back at ancient medicine, which predates what the biomedical model is, or what we refer to as Western medicine, they also had humoral medicine in that, and that was, using hot, cold, damp, all of these elements that you use in Chinese medicine. So I think that actually historically, pretty much all cultures had it, but obviously Chinese medicine definitely has a very Eastern approach to it. And it's spread all over the world now. It's very systematized. And
I think just for those of us who are not too familiar with that, you would think because we're in Asia, most people would be familiar with traditional Chinese medicine, but it surprised me how many people are not actually familiar with it. I think there are a lot of people, maybe in Hong Kong and Singapore, who are more familiar, but there's so many theories. Can you just give a very quick summary of, what it is? What's it all about?
Chinese medicine, not as just pertains to the menstrual cycle, but well, yeah, you're right. That actually in Thailand, there isn't, even though it's becoming more so, they've had Chinese medicine here for a long time. You don't practice all the same things, although there are elements of it in traditional Thai medicine. So what it is the base theory is the five elements. And you can see the chart here. And these five elements encompass pretty much anything that can go on in your body. And you'll see that the main organs are in there, the ones that you need to live. And when you look at this, the reason it's in that circular format is because it also pertains to the different seasons that we're in. Mm. And so fire would be like the peak of summer, but also you have seasonality in your body and in the menstrual cycle, for example. So you'll have different times when fire, wood, earth relate more to your period and that cycle than that month cycle. And if you have something that goes wrong, for example, with the wood element, which relates to the liver, you might do something that to treat it yourself at home. Whereas like I might give you herbs and acupuncture, but at home you could treat it with a glass of water and lemon because the sour element stimulates the liver. So that's how it relates to nature. And that's the base theory along with yin and yang theory for Chinese medicine. And you use it to diagnose and to treat and to formulate a treatment plan.
So this is basically the 5 elemental approaches to TCM.
Yeah. Yes, and everything feeds into this chart. I mean, it gets much more complex, but the way you choose points on the body, the way you choose herbs, it all feeds into this.
So
sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to go ask if we were to have an overview of how it's being used to treat the menstrual cycle and how it pertains specifically to that, and just dive deep into it.
So for the menstrual cycle, you have 4 phases in Chinese medicine. And those phases, they start with from day 1. Day 1 is the first day of your period. Mm-hmm. And day 1 is a more yin phase. So yin and yang theory also feeds into this 5 element chart. Yin and yang, yin is everything that the form and the shape of your body, whereas yang is the energy that it takes to move things. So in a yin phase, which is the blood phase of the body, when you have your menstrual cycle, that's in the first phase. You're going to focus very much on anything that is yin, which yin is dark and yang is light. So when you're in a yin phase, you're going to be very like resting and feeding your body in the right way, like to build your blood. You're not going to do vigorous exercise. You're not going to go swimming in a cold pool. This also is the hot and cold theory, where you don't want to you don't want to drink cold, you don't want to eat cold, you don't want to swim in something cold when you have your period, because just like when you put water in the freezer and it freezes and it doesn't flow right, that's when you get problems like PMS, short cycles, you have infertility issues sometimes. A lot of things can come into play with that if you don't treat the menstrual cycle. And when you actually when I was living in China, I would see that everybody does that. Like from, a 14-year-old knows all the way up to, into your 40s, they're very aware of how to treat the menses in that way. Like you rest, you don't swim, you do all of that. So that's the first phase. And you really focus on blood and blood building foods. And you'll see in that chart, that 5 element chart, the blood is built primarily with red things, but also with dark leafy greens, and it gets more complex. But you can think of things like beets and lamb and black beans and the hongzao and gochitsu, and which is the goji berries. And the second phase is after the period, and that's your proliferation phase. So that's when your lining starts to build up again and estrogen is dominant in the body. And then when you go into the next phase, it's ovulation. That's when you're going from the yin to the yang. So where you're going into a more active phase, and you can be a little bit more active in that time. Ovulation is when you're about to, in that 48-hour window, your temperature spikes and you get warmer, and that's right before you release an egg out of the follicle. So you're thinking of different herbs and foods at that time. And then you move into the last phase, which is after ovulation, and it's dominated by progesterone. And that's when either you get pregnant or you're going to shed your lining. So it's a very active phase again. And you can be more active with your exercise, and you're not going to be napping and doing things like that. You're probably going to have more energy. But as you end this phase, you're heading back into the first part where you get your menstrual cycle again. And that's when people get PMS. And then you think more about the liver and about stress and about PMS and things like that. So you want to eat things that are going to move the liver, and they're going to help you to again shed the lining and not have that those PMS symptoms.
So PMS is very real, and so
PMS is very real.
Things you eat actually can make the cramps and your mood swings worse, and other things you eat can improve it. Is that something that's a universal thing for everybody, or is it prescribed individually, due to your body type or whatever it is? Like,
Well, everybody is different, and some people are not affected as much because when we're born, we have, they say 50% of us is, our genetics, what we're predisposed to. So maybe, if you have a mother who was predisposed to PMS, you may be more likely to have it. But the other 50% is everything you do. So I think I would say that it's prescribed to everybody, but not everybody is always affected in the same way. So some people drink cold drinks and, they don't have a problem. But if they tend to have a weaker digestion, or maybe they have more of a kidney issue or something along those lines, if they're going to do all those things that are counterproductive for the period, then they will have more problems. And you can tell because once you start practicing it in a very simple way, where you just don't drink anything cold during your period, then you really do see the difference. And then you become deathly afraid of it. Like when I was in China, people would never dream of having a cold drink. They would just be like, no, 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 no. And they're very open and honest that they had their period.
yep.
Which is refreshing because it's not a shameful thing really.
So, I mean, you did a series on period myths, and one of the myths that came up is you shouldn't drink coconut water while on your period. So I'm listening here and thinking that's actually not a myth.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's a myth. Yeah, I mean, coconut water, but I have heard many different things about coconut water. So I can't completely speak to it, but I do think that it's cooling. And I wouldn't have it in that phase. I would have it more in the phase when you're getting warm, when your temperature's spiking, like just after ovulation, when you want to like calm the body down. You want to think about all the different phases that you're in, but you also just should feel it to some degree if you're warm, you're cold. But in general, you don't have anything cold. However, coconut water is cold in nature versus in temperature. I mean, you could drink it hot, but it's still going to be cold. If you know what I mean, like you could have a cucumber is cold, whereas you can make a cucumber soup and it's hot, but it's still going to be a cold temperature food, which is something that you have to learn in time. Like durian is hot and everybody knows it's hot. You eat it and you feel hot.
So should we be taking durian during our period?
You could, but it's quite fatty. And sometimes it's a little stagnant because it's so hot. It's hot versus like warm. Like chicken is warm. Yes. And maybe a red beet would be warm, but durian is very hot, which is why people balance it with the mangosteen, which is cooling.
Very interesting. So I wanted to go back on what should we eat when we have our period. You mentioned blood building foods. So can you give us a few examples of what that may be?
And the thing that's easy to remember, there's much more on this list, but you want to think of things that are red or dark. Cherries.
Right.
Lamb is more blood building than beef, but beef is good. A little piece of liver goes a long ways for people who do like to eat liver. That is like, even though I loathe the term superfood, I would say liver is a superfood after your menstrual cycle because you can build the blood so profusely with that. Liver, red beans, black beans, dark leafy greens are also very good because the liver itself plays into the menstrual cycle, and both in the biomedical and in the TCM model. So black beans, goji berries, red dates, soups, anything cooked and warm like that. A very common thing that people have in China is the hongzao and the goji berry tea. And people will have that every day during their menstrual cycle and right after. You'll find women who tend to be anemic, because a lot of the times women don't eat meat as much as men do, and they'll get dizzy or they feel weak or fatigued after their period because it's actually significant blood loss. So you can actually measure anemia right after the period if you tend to be anemic anyway. And having this would tremendously help. So you could have this hongzao and goji berry tea every day, or people make like a congee with black beans, black sesame seeds.
Mm-hmm. Does this replace, so for vegetarians, I know you mentioned to me like just, you know, your regular boat noodle is great because you're literally,
they put blood in,
eating blood. But for those, there's so many Asians and Thai people who don't eat meat. So this is a very good supplement for that, alternative.
yes. And so would, unless you're vegan, having butter, having things of that nature, and eggs, unless you're vegan.
Mm-hmm.
But black beans, red beans, cherries, red beets are also an excellent blood builder. When you're a vegetarian, you do have to work a little harder on it. Whereas, you know, if you weren't vegetarian and you wanted to just take care of it with a little piece of liver, you could, or a bowl of boat noodles with blood squirted in, literally, you can just eat the things that the Chinese theory is often like, you know, you use kidneys to treat the kidney, you use the brain to treat the brain. And while that is not an absolute for everything, you can generally remember things in that way too.
I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer, and yet, you know, when I feel tired during the days leading up or during my period, I just have a tendency to just push myself even harder. But I guess what you're saying is just really listen to your body and just take that time off to take a break, and it's fine.
Yeah, you should. Absolutely. And the same goes for after women have children. There's that month where you sit. It's the same, because that's on an exponential scale of like the menstrual cycle, right? You lose so much blood. Yeah, you should be resting in the same way. I mean, you can work, but you shouldn't be going out doing boot camp and then swimming and then, you know, drinking like a cold margarita. But you could have a glass of red wine and do yin yoga and watch TV.
No cold margarita.
Save those for the ovulation phase.
So just to recap, and by the way, everyone, feel free if you have questions, just type them in to the chat group, and we'll get to them soon. I wanted to just, I know you briefly discussed, there's this whole taboo in Thailand about tampons. And
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just wanted to get your opinion on it. Should you be sticking anything up there when there is a flow coming out? Because there's so many opinions on that. Some people say it's fine, some people don't. I guess, what is your opinion on that?
I feel at this stage, and I have been a tampon user and I'm not a tampon user. I think there are moments that you find them more practical, but I would never use an ultra absorbent tampon because you're really plugging the flow. And I think over time, you'll find issues with that. I say don't plug the flow if you can avoid it. Mm. And while, you know, pads and period underwear aren't always as ideal, I do think that they're a better way to go. And back in the day when we weren't working the way we do now, you know, people could take time off and I guess not have to worry so much about how they were going to manage their menstrual cycle outside of the home. But I don't necessarily prescribe to that. And I had a teacher who told me long ago in China, never plug it. And it's stuck in my head until this day.
What about the menstrual cup? Is that the same as plugging it?
No, it wouldn't be. But I think there's some practical issues with it sometimes. But I think that is a good alternative depending on how you can manage it.
So we do have some questions which I'll get to, and then we'll jump back in there. One of the questions from our listeners is it okay to drink wet red wine during your period? I'm assuming it's red, so we should be drinking it.
Red wine is good. And really, they say the first glass is fine, and then after that it becomes cloying and dehydrating, which you don't want. But having a goblet of red wine is a very good thing.
White wine?
White wine, not so much. There's not much to say about it. Although wine in general is a good mover, a blood mover. And so a lot of the time when if you don't want to take herbs, you know, in the cooked form or in the powder form, you'll see, you know, like when you see a snake in a bottle of white liquor, there's a reason for that because it's a blood tonic. It'll bring the herbs to the body much quicker. But again, it's the first one is okay.
So as blood is moving out, you're just trying to replenish your body with blood.
You're just trying to do that.
Minimal movement helps.
Yes, gentle movement.
Gentle
movement. You know, taking a walk is fine, but not jogging necessarily.
So I'm going to take a few more questions. One is, are there foods to induce your period when the cycle is late? I think we spoke about also just regularity of cycle, and maybe you can speak in addition to that about just extending your cycle.
So cycle irregularity gets a little complex because some people have a short cycle, like a 3-week cycle, and some people have long 5 to 6 week cycles. And those tend to be different reasons, right? So if it is because it's a late cycle, then you have to look into what that is and why. I mean, some people it's because they might be very depleted, or some people might be very excess. And when I say depleted, you know, well, anorexia can cause like very short, very long cycles. And that might be like a depleted scenario where you have to build up the person and the blood a lot more. Whereas you could have someone who's very excess, and that's why they have irregularity. And that's PCOS is an example of that. Endometriosis can be an example of that. And then you have to really look into, you know, the complexity of that. How do you bring it on? You want to think about the liver, and that chart that I provided for you is you want to think of things that move the liver, which ends up being green foods and sour flavored foods. And sometimes the first glass of alcohol, but not always, right? You want to build the blood. If you tend to be constipated, sometimes that's when people have late cycles as well. And that means that you have a blood deficiency if you tend to have that kind of scenario.
There's how do you take note of your blood discharge? What is considered a healthy flow? So I guess you answered that. It really depends on each person, I'm assuming.
You want it to be bright red. When it starts to get clotted or dark, then again, you're looking at a lot of stasis. And that can be from heat, or it can be from dryness. A good tea to address something like that, and to address a period that comes late, is to just make mint steeped in hot water. And since it's so abundant here, you just put like literally a handful of mint leaves and pour boiled water over it and let it sit, and drinking that 3 to 5 times a day around that time. So also when you have like a dark period, you would do the same because it's moving it. Mint is something that we use in Chinese medicine to treat menstrual irregularities of that nature. And if you want to use a tea in a medicinal way, you want to drink it 3 to 5 times a day. Grajiab tea, roselle is also very good for that.
So I have a question, like, why do some people get such painful cramps and other people just don't get it at all? Like, is it the foods they're eating that are causing that? Is it genetics? Is it because you see some people aren't able to move, whereas other people just get on with it? And can acupuncture actually treat that as well?
Yes, if you give acupuncture 2 to 3 months, it generally will correct it. And it is a very common phenomenon. Again, the reason Chinese medicine, I think, is very successful is because if 5 people come in to see me with cramps, generally there's 5 different reasons. So even though it often relates back to the liver again, and I would look at things that to move that, I can't necessarily say there's only like a one-off reason for it. But generally with herbs and acupuncture, you can remedy that. And people tend to be drinking cold drinks a lot of the time. You know, now there's like in the last 15 years, a smoothie craze, which is the bane a TCM doctor's experience, because people come in drinking smoothies to replace all kinds of meals all the time, and that's just cold and damp. And if you have cramps, that would be the first thing I remove from your diet, because it's just going to be like ice in your body.
So you're saying a lot of the cramps have to do with what you're eating?
What you're eating, what you're doing, stress. Stress can really increase cramps significantly.
I have a friend who chews ice constantly and has the worst cramps. So I should probably tell her, she's probably on here, to stop chewing ice.
Say that's like a calcium deficiency. Sometimes people chew ice for that. I've chewed ice in the past, so, and that's the worst thing you can do during your period.
A calcium deficiency makes you chew ice? That's interesting.
It is one of the reasons that they say people chew ice. It's that crunch that they're looking for. It's like when people eat dirt because they're so iron deficient. Have you heard of that?
I've not heard that.
No, but that is like a medical case study. People will eat dirt when they're so iron deficient. And the same thing with the ice. I mean, I'm not saying it's like 100% calcium deficiency, but it tends to happen. But definitely not during the period.
I want to try to cover as much of these questions as possible. So if you don't mind, one of them is papaya salad considered a cold food to have during your period?
Yes, it would be.
Off the papaya salad.
But it's a great food because, see, papaya salad is also like a little bit sour and it's green, and you would put that in the liver category of that chart. And that's a great thing to have right before your period, because PMS starts right before your period. So the mung bean liver cleanse that I also gave you a recipe for is a great thing to have right before your period. And papaya salad would go in line with that as well, because you want to move the liver.
Can we pull up
have a drink?
Can we pull up the recipe, the mung bean recipe? Do we have it?
You have it somewhere.
There you go. So 1 day per week to start. This is a liver cleanse.
Yes.
So when do you know you should be doing this?
Pardon, say that again, please.
When do you know that we should be doing a liver cleanse? So severe PMS, irregularity.
Dark colored blood.
Time. Okay.
A lot of people fall into this. A lot of people. It's a very liver time in the world right now. You know, it's just the liver takes on all the stress, both biomedically. You know, the liver it processes everything for your body. And it also does so in Chinese medicine. So a lot of people end up with all of these issues at some point.
Yeah.
And this is actually not just Chinese medicine, but it comes from Ayurveda as well. They call it khichdi in Ayurveda, and they do it a little bit different. But in Chinese medicine, they use it as well. This mung beans are cooling, so you don't have them during your period. But you'll find, like, at least in China, and I haven't seen it so much here actually, but they'll do mung bean ice cream.
Oh yeah.
In the peak of summer, because mung beans treat that extreme heat and stagnation. So
all really simple recipes that we can just do at home. It seems like just a bunch of
super easy
boiling.
Super easy. And when you're tired of eating and you don't want to think about what to eat, this is a great recipe to have as long as you're not menstruating.
Okay.
Great recipe. It's very simple and it covers the whole 5 elements. Covers all the flavors, the bitter, the sweet, the sour, the salty.
This is great. Thank you. Are there any more, another question is, any more books or resources that you recommend for us to learn more about TCM and the female body? Was one of the questions we had.
I always like to recommend the Web That Has No Weaver. Is a really good place to start to understand the 5 elements and just your body in general, because it's beyond the menstruation will be covered in there, but it's beyond the menstruation. You want to actually understand your body at all times. You know, when you get a vertex headache or when you're getting digestive issues, what do you do? What do you eat?
Sorry, that That website again is what?
It's called, no, the book is The Web That Has No Weaver.
Web that has no weaver. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You can write that down. Okay, great. Also, is it normal? One of the questions is it normal to have migraines before your period? They've been told by a doctor that it is normal. So from a TCM point of view, it doesn't, what
It's
do you,
not, it's not, it's not, it happens often, but I wouldn't say that it's normal. It shouldn't, you don't have to suffer something like that. You can change the course of a migraine.
do you know what causes it?
That is all again back to the liver. That phase right before your menstrual cycle is very much that, and you want to really focus on bolstering your digestion and doing things that move the liver. Again, like the to prevent a migraine, if you know that you're prone to them right before your menstrual cycle, having that mint tea is a really good idea, and you want to have it at least 3 to 5 times a day. So if you know you're going to get a migraine 2 days before your period and your period is somewhat regular, you would start drinking the mint tea 5 days before your period so that you never head into that direction.
What I really like is these are just such simple solutions. It's not like it's not something that is expensive or hard to do or hard to find. Really practical solutions to this.
And you can get everything here actually in Thailand. It's all very accessible.
Are the Chinese herbs quite accessible here too? I think you just there's a place that prescribes them.
Yes, I prescribe out of Huachio. Um, Huachio has really good herb quality because it has good turnover and it has a good resources that have been vetted. And St. Louis Hospital has really good herbs as well. There are also like smaller Chinese pharmacies, and there's a lot of places that you can buy the herbs. You can even buy them in tops. They have the dried herb section where you can buy the gochitsa, the goji berries, and the hongzao, the red dates, and you can buy the grachia, all the dried herbs, and they're actually a good herb for migraines. And for people who tend to be very livery is the chrysanthemum flowers. And that's very bitter because it's a heat clearing herb. So people tend to drink that all the time. If you tend to get red eyes and vertex headaches right at the top of your head, sometimes people get migraines that are temporal or occipital. It depends where you get your headaches. But the chrysanthemum flower is a really good one as well that you can find here easily. And again, you want to drink it 3 to 5 times a day if you want to use it in a medical way.
Hmm. So you mentioned St. Louis Hospital and Huaqiao. Are they expensive just for viewers to get an idea on price point? I mean, you can boil them yourself, I'm assuming, or you can get these guys to mix it for you.
So Huachio, you can get, well, seeing a practitioner is quite reasonable there. It'll be anywhere from 700 to 1,000 baht. You have to wait sometimes. There's a line and a queue and everything, but the herbs are also quite reasonable. So for 2 weeks of herbs, depending on what your formula is, because every formula is catered just for you, and it can be anywhere from 3 herbs to 15 herbs. The price will vary, but 2 weeks of herbs should cost you anywhere from like about 1,000. It can be anywhere from like 600 to like 1,500 at the higher end. So I think it's very affordable.
Yeah.
And people can cook it for you, and then you just get little packets that you open and you drink them 2 times a day. Or you can do the powder if you're flying, if anyone ever flies again. And you can also take pills, but the pills are not as effective. Really, it generally goes first cooked herbs, raw herbs, powder, pills. The pills are all standardized formulas, much like you would take an aspirin or, a pharmaceutical, because that's just like generalized medicine. That's a modern version. But the beauty and the effect of Chinese medicine is when you get a formula that's written just for you.
So more questions from the audience. What would be some herbal remedies or food groups that would help with hormonal bloating dysfunctionalities? That's a big one. Everyone has bloating.
Bloating tends to happen right before your period quite significantly. And there is a biomedical reason for that, as well as well, your uterus is like swollen. But there's also, in Chinese medicine, they view it as a digestive weakness. Your spleen is weak at that time. And that's in that chart. It goes back to the yellow, to the earth. And the earth is the center of everything. And this is why digestion is so important and why we damage it so much. So for bloating, you would want to focus a lot on things like kautom and like juk and congee and things like that. You want to eat very simple, bland foods that are, sweet in the way that pumpkin is sweet, but not with sugar. Pumpkin, yams, a rice soup. You want to have those kinds of things. You want to really clean up the diet and make it and eat more frequently, but smaller amounts. So for an herbal remedy, there's one that is a generalized one, but again, it's better to get something written for you. And there's so many great herbalists at Huachio that you can go see, but Bao He one is a really good digestive formula that people tend to have. Like if you don't want to go to an herbalist and you want to just ask for a digestive formula, Bao He one is one. BAOHEWAN. That's a good formula for the digestive issues.
Okay. So I know this is about, the menstruation, and there's so many questions. I guess women all face this every single month, and it's something that people don't really speak about, sadly, and yet everybody kind of pops the Tylenol and gets on with their day. And it's kind of sad, and it's great that I think we can have this platform to just share all these things about. If you don't mind me digressing, the reason I met you is, I was trying to get pregnant, and someone recommended acupuncture would help with all that. Is what you eat as well, and how does it help, I guess? And if someone was trying to get pregnant, what suggestions would you give to just assist in that?
So first I would do a really thorough intake to look at what their constitution is, to see if there's an area that is a little bit, deficient or weaker. And then after that, there is a general way to eat, and I would curate that for the person. But going back to those 4 phases and thinking about before your period, during your period, after your period, and ovulation, and thinking about the different things that you have. So if you tend to be having PMS, I would make sure to correct that. You want to have a very healthy flow. You want to have no PMS. You want to have energy. And I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of bloating because it's a natural process. There's going to be some bloating. You shouldn't have excessive bloating. You shouldn't have excessive headaches or PMS or a short cycle. You want to really look at getting that cycle to within, 28 to 32 days. I mean, sometimes people will fall around 26 or 33 days, and that's fine. But that's the way that you gauge it. And you want to see that the blood is flowing very, like in a nice bright red, not a lot of clots. And as those issues come up, then you start to plug in the different foods. And I think it's really important, actually, to have the foods be a part of your treatment plan, along with herbs and the acupuncture. But food is essential. Building the blood is essential, because if you never replenish the blood after you have your menstrual cycle, it's very hard to build the lining to hold a baby.
Do people with like anemia tend to have more menstrual issues? I hear there's a correlation there, like anemic, more cramps, just irregular cycles, and so.
Yes, I think that, well, you don't necessarily have more cramps if you're anemic. You can, but the anemia tends to be more an absence of period, amenorrhea, or a very short cycle. And that is just as insidious as like having a really long cycle or something excessive, like an excessive issue like PCOS or endometriosis. So anemia is a big deal though, because a lot of women tend to not, again, eat a lot of meat and And the way we live is we're burning the candle at both ends. So there's no time to replenish that blood. And if you don't eat right for it, and you're also just not sleeping enough, then it can become an issue for sure. But anemia, I always address it as the first thing in the questions that I'll ask patients about what they're eating. You know, are they sleeping enough? People who are anemic tend to have like poor sleep, insomnia. Sometimes there'll be like anxiety and things like that thrown in as well.
Oh my God, that's me.
That's everybody. Don't worry.
I think the next series should be about sleep. That's also something everybody does. Everyone has a period and everyone sleeps. What's going on with women having menopause earlier and girls having their period earlier?
I think that a lot of that is environmental, and the what we're eating and the way we're living. Um, I mean, getting their period earlier, definitely. Like, if you're eating, I mean, I'm very careful with my daughters with like eating chicken that's full of hormones and, you know, plastics and things like that. Have they been able to prove it? No. I mean, can you make like a decent hypothesis on it? Probably. You can probably make a correlation and look at how we package foods, the way we produce meat. So yeah, girls are definitely getting their period earlier. And getting your period earlier doesn't necessarily mean that you will go into menopause earlier. You tend to want to look at what your mother had. So if your mother went into menopause at a certain age, it tends to happen the same for you. Allowing for, you know, other illnesses and things that can come into play. People are having perimenopausal symptoms sooner. I think they're just having a lot of menstrual issues because we're blocking the menstruation. We don't really treat it so well. You know, we're trying to like stop our period all the time. It's an annoyance, it's a hindrance in the way we treat it. Whereas, you know, if you do that over long enough period of time, then you're going to have issues later. Like if you've been on the pill for, and I'm not against the pill, but if you've been on the pill for 25 years and then you go off it, it's very hard for your body to re-regulate the hormonal balance. It takes time.
So I know that was really educational. We have 15 minutes here. I just wanted to open the floor for if we had any more questions and just to make sure I haven't missed any of these questions. I think we got most of it. But yeah, I mean, is there any other key takeaways that you wanted to give to everybody during this very informative session here?
Well, I think it's really important that you support your digestion as a very, like, for everything, not just for your menstruation, that you're eating relatively carefully, you know, that you're not skipping. There's so many food fads out there, and it's very difficult to wade through the noise in the food sphere, but you have to find the right way for yourself. But I think digestion is something that's underrated out there, and paying attention to your body and how it's doing with food and making sure that you feed it and you nourish it and that you sleep enough. I mean, generally, if you can take care of those two things, you're in a really good place for the long run. If you sleep enough and you eat well, and then you cheat 10% of the time, at least, because pleasure is also really important. Those are the most basic important things for any health issue, and in particular the menstruation. But I think you should never plug your menstruation, and you should try to honor it. And the longer you have your period, the younger you're going to look. So I always say, you know, don't hate your period so much. It's a really good, it's a great thing when you have it.
There's this huge fad, and it's really easy in Thailand, these pills that you take to delay your period.
Right.
Like, how damaging is that to your body? Gary?
I wouldn't do it.
Wow.
I mean, if you're going to do it once for like a wedding, okay,
Mhm.
I get it. But if you're going to do it frequently because it's so annoying to have it at a business conference or on the plane or when you're going to swim or whatever, I wouldn't do it. I think that when you mess around with that for long enough, it's very hard to find your way back to the beginning.
It's kind
And
of
there's
like
just so many things. Pardon?
sleeping pills, right? The minute you start taking it, you
Sleeping
mess
pills
with.
are another thing. Those are really tough to come back from too. And the thing is with sleeping pills, eventually you get rebound insomnia anyway, right? So you'll be able to sleep for a while on sleeping pills and eventually they don't work. And then treating the insomnia is really difficult. Insomnia is probably the top three thing that I see in my practice around the world. Every country, doesn't matter who, people are having major sleep issues around the world. And it's a big problem because if you don't sleep, your body can't repair, it can't heal, it can't do anything. It's the time that it needs to do everything for you to function. So yeah, it's like sleeping pills. But I think, everyone learns what they can do, like their limitations too, because some people can handle all of it. Some people can smoke cigarettes until they're 85 and not a thing happens to them. And someone else will get lung cancer without smoking cigarettes. So you have to know what your body.
So I think what I took away from this is it's very individualized. I think actually all our speakers have said that there's no fast track, and the solution is catered towards you.
Mhm.
Um, Unfortunately, from what I hear, you're not taking any new clients due to COVID. Um, yeah, so I think a lot of our disappointed viewers will have questions as to where they can go and what they can do. But I guess anybody who wants an update, feel free to type your email in to the chat, and if Nicole has time or starts taking on any new clients, which I don't think is going to be for a while. You've got some cleaning thing, right? You need to alternate
Yeah.
every hour.
Well, I'm going at half capacity right now just to keep space between people and just to keep an eye on how things are progressing. So I'm only seeing established patients, and but I think we'll see what happens in September. I mean, Thailand looks like it's in a good place, and there might be I might open up more, but for the time being, it's the easiest way is to just limit it. But I'm happy to refer people. There's a lot of great practitioners in Thailand. They're doing some really good stuff. Huachio is wonderful. There's other practitioners all over the place. Traffic is bad, so I know people in every corner so that you don't have to come so far. There's
Um,
lots of good work here.
so just one last parting question. I know we need to wrap up on time, and I really appreciate your time. I know you've got small kids, and this is not easy for you to allocate an hour of your time for us.
Okay.
How did you get the name the Spice Doctor?
So when in my journey to becoming a Chinese, to studying Chinese medicine, I when I was at Tufts, I got a grant to go study the Green Revolution in Cuba. And I had a lot of interest in how food is used as medicine throughout history. And I did a dissertation on garlic's use as medicine, from ancient times until now throughout all the cultures. And in Cuba, because after the Soviet bloc collapse, they had to they didn't have access to all the pharmaceuticals, so they built these agropecuarios and all what they're like little medical farms in each neighborhood, and that really sparked an idea and an interest in that aspect of health. And so when I eventually made my way into Chinese medicine, one of the 5 tenets of Chinese medicine is medicinal cooking, Yao Shan. And so herbs or spices, I just ended up really focusing on that in my time when I lived in China and in my research and in my work. I've been spending a lot of time translating books on Yaoshan into English, and also making the recipes friendly towards different palates. And that's how I got to the spice stock. It's just a way to use food as medicine and herbs.
I love it. So there's an overflow of information here. For those of you who didn't catch it all, we will be on, we are live on Facebook and we will be reposting it. Also, just bragging rights, Nicole has been treating me, so I'm an old patient, and last month was the first time I actually had no period cramps. So if you practice what she says and are disciplined about it, it's not that hard, but it felt great to not have to pop that Tylenol and not be in pain for a day or two. So thank you for that.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. Any last words of advice to all the women out there to empower them?
I would say they call the period the red dragon in Chinese medicine. And I think that that's very empowering. I've always loved talking about my period, much to the chagrin of other people, but I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think you should really honor the power of it and treat your body accordingly, and take that rest when you can, and you don't have to be busy all the time.
I love it. We spend all our time hating our period, and when it's gone, we're like, oh my God, no. So that's great.
Enjoy it while you have it.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And thank you everybody for signing on to Dragonfly's 4th series. We hope to see you guys again soon.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
It's been an honor. Thank you.